Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Science Scribbler Q&A and Classify. It's our September stream. My name's Trisha, and today I'm joined by Kat. Kat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, it's lovely to see you again, Trisha. So my name is Kat. I am the Physics Access Officer at Oxford University. But before I took on this role, I worked with Patricia and with the rest of the Science Scribbler team developing the Zooniverse in Schools virus factory workshops.
Amazing. So, Kat, how did you get into physics engagement and doing things with schools?
Yeah, I feel like it wasn't an option in schools careers talks, right?
No.
Um, I started out with a physics degree at university and I trained as a teacher pretty quickly after university. But I only taught in classrooms for about 5 years. And after that, I moved into informal education. So I've worked a lot as a private tutor, I've worked in a couple of different countries. And when I joined the Science Scribbler team, I had just come from 5 years working at the Science Museum in London as part of their learning team. I was running a lot of science clubs in my own community, and I was kind of building on my formal education background, the informal stuff I had done at the museum, and I had just started doing an MA in education at UCL as well. So working with the Science Scribbler team kind of brought together loads of things that I was interested in and that I was working on at the time. So it was just kind of a perfect things coming together when I joined this team.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've never really considered like informal science education as a name of something that you do, but I guess there is, science exists in the world around us at all times, and there are those informal forms of education. And one of the things that, we talk about the Zooniverse and citizen science on this channel a lot because the Science Scribbler projects run on the Zooniverse. And Kat, you've worked with the Zooniverse and you've worked on citizen science in general. What was your first introduction to that kind of as a topic?
My first encounter with it was actually getting really young kids to classify galaxies. So when I started working with you guys and I got to work on the galaxies as well as the viruses, I had been in a classroom and I'd used it before. And it was running science clubs. We'd been having Space Week. And I had just found this website and couldn't believe I had actually never heard of it because I clearly should have heard of it before.
Yeah,
So for me, it was kind of, I came across it hands on and then learned more about it.
it's really interesting because I think that a lot of people encounter things that can be classified as citizen science, but they don't really label it in that way.
Yeah,
So
completely.
I think my first experience with the Zooniverse was also when I started my role working with the Science Scribbler projects, which are on the Zooniverse. But then, if I think about all of the citizen science that happens like physically rather than online, that kind of stuff people think of as maybe you're helping with some kind of like health study, and so you think of yourself as like a patient, right? Or a control
Yeah,
group. Or maybe you're going to your pond and you're counting frog spawn or whatever. And like
yeah. Or
that's
like you go
still,
along
yeah,
to one of those events at a natural history museum, but it feels quite contained. You don't
yeah,
realize that it's bigger.
yeah. So I think I always like interacted with things that are kind of close to citizen science or would be citizen science when I was younger. I remember doing, I don't know if you did you put a grid on your number plate and you count how many insects are in a square.
Oh
Uh,
no, that's really fun though.
yeah, so I remember doing that when I was much younger, when there were more insects that flew onto your windscreen.
Yeah,
And you would count how many were in a square over a certain period of time, and then I think submit that number so that it could then measure insect, not biodiversity, I guess it's density population. So
yeah,
you'd put your where you were and then also or where you'd driven and how many insects you'd counted. So I guess like I interacted with that in that first point, but I never really thought that it was citizen science, and I never understood it to be citizen science. And I think that that happens in a lot of educational settings as well when people get involved with science, and that kind of moves on to actually contributing to a wider data set that's used in research. That link is sometimes lost.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's get back to online citizen science then with the Zooniverse. I got totally sidetracked there.
That's a good
um,
sidetrack.
it is a good sidetrack, yeah. Tell me about, yeah, your experience using online citizen science in the classroom, and what kind of age groups have you taken that to?
So when I came across it before I started working with you, I had very much used it just for the galaxies. I hadn't explored the Zooniverse more widely, or really any of the other citizen science projects out there. But with the galaxies, I had done it from maybe ages 4 up
Wow.
to about ages 11. I'd had really teeny kids because, particularly when the images are from the Hubble Space Telescope, they're really clear. If we use some of the telescopes that look further away, the images aren't quite as easy to classify. But some of the first ones were really easy. So I've used it with that group. And since then, with the Zooniverse in schools, we really focused in on that transition period, on late primary school to early secondary school. And that, I think, has been a really interesting age range to work with because it captured them at that moment where the teachers who teach them change it, the specialisms of the teachers change, the way that they do science as a separate subject rather than a Tuesday afternoon changes. And I think that was a really interesting age group to focus on. Now I actually have gone back to teaching after all that time away. I now spend half of my week teaching and half in Oxford. And I'm using citizen science with some of my older students. But what's quite interesting is the workshops that we put together and that we're here for today. I've found with the increasing role of AI, I'm using that side of the workshops alongside the citizen science now to teach the young people who I work with about what's going on behind the scenes and help them have an understanding of the positives and the limitations of those aspects.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I really like about the Science Scribbler projects, is that I'm not gonna make a broad statement about how for the greater good it is, but it's a really good example of how AI is being used and has been used for a really long time in research. And yeah, you really can model the limitations, and you can show the need
Yeah.
for things to progress and really understand, yeah, visually see what the computer can't see as well at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a start of year meeting, and our head teacher was asking us all to try and think of creative ways we could talk about AI in our subject and help build our young people's knowledge. And I was like, I've got one. We've got this. We can take it. We're good to go.
Fantastic. So tell me about building and writing and creating the virus factory in schools, like teaching resource.
Oh, gotta get my brain back in there. So I think what we were trying to do here was channel a lot of the informal science education energy that we had in our team from workshops and communities and things, but match it to the formal learning experience that I had. I had also been really fortunate that I had just come from the Science Museum, and we were one of the first groups to trial the Science Capital teaching approach. So we had been one of the original partners, we had worked it in with our new gallery. So I was also really keen to try and use that as what united the informal and the formal. So a lot of what we were doing at first was working out what teachers wanted from a workshop so that what we could offer was actually relevant. And what we were trying to do was be able to offer them a set of workshops where they could say, our students have covered this part of the curriculum, rather than asking them to carve out time for us to do something extra in addition to the curriculum.
But that's one of the big problems, or like the yeah time and
Yeah, so
restrictions
much.
and structure. Like I know it's school dependent, but sometimes you've got to teach a certain part of the curriculum at a certain point in the year, and there's really no
Yeah,
time for that moving past the curriculum. So yeah, designing something that kind of fits in or can drop into different areas is, well,
yeah.
yeah.
I spent an obscene amount of time doing curriculum mapping spreadsheets. So behind the scenes, I was mapping to the English curriculum, but I was really determined it wasn't just England. So there's also a mapping document for the Welsh curriculum and for the Scottish curriculum, so that each teacher would be able to see this is the part of the curriculum, this is how it relates to what you're doing. And it might not look like work that you've previously done, but it does cover these elements of the curriculum. So that was a big thing for us when we were developing it. We really wanted it to work for teachers. And then we wanted to make it relevant, to use best practice. We were looking at those science capital principles of things like broadening what counts, find out what they know first, think about the role models who we are introducing, think about making science something that people do rather than an abstract activity. And that side of it really helped to shape a lot of the activities, probably in a way that when you receive a pack or when you look at a lesson, it's not immediately obvious that that much went into it.
I mean, I think it is. I think it shows that there's a lot of dedicated time. I think that you're selling yourself short there. But you're right, it's important that you create something that has flexibility in mind as well, right? So that's
Yeah.
the point, is that it's not super prescriptive and there's opportunities to take it in different directions. Kat, you've mentioned mentioned Science Capital and the Science Capital
Yeah.
teaching approach, and I love it. But for people who don't have an idea of what it's about, can you say more?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I work in these two sectors, in informal education where we meet together, everyone talks about it. Um, but Science Capital is only gradually working its way out into schools. But I think at simplest, it's the idea that science is about more than learning the content. It's also about who you know, where you learn it, and what your overall experiences and thoughts and feelings about science are. Does that feel like a sort of fair summary of it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing is being able to place science in your local context, right? So like
Yeah.
understanding maybe how you connect to science geographically as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of spun out of this really longitudinal study that was originally run at King's and then out of UCL. And although lots of really interesting science education and communication theory has come out of it, they've also landed us with some really concrete checklists and teaching strategies, which is particularly helpful. And loads of really simple tips, like start your lesson by finding out what students know, but really broadly. Not what science knowledge do they have, but have they come across this in the context of, like for viruses, have they ever been unwell? Have they ever met someone who's been unwell? We did this just after COVID, and I think we hit a peak of children knowing what the word virus was.
Yeah, definitely. And there was lots of questions also about, like super viruses and things like that,
Yeah,
right? And well, one of them was maybe, yeah, like could a virus create zombies or something like that? That was a question that
yeah.
I think was floated at some point by a class.
But really tapping into what they currently knew and what was relevant before we started any science, and anchoring it in those everyday experiences and showing them that what they thought was valid and more than that was scientific. So it's
Yeah,
kind of bypassing that, would you like to be a scientist when you grow up, and telling them that they are currently scientists.
yeah.
The only difference is that they're not being paid for it.
And I think that's the thing that I really love about incorporating the citizen science project into something like a workshop. I've run a couple of workshops with classes as part of some open days, and being able to say, hey, you've just contributed to our science research.
Yeah.
This is what science research looks like. This is what doing science is. I think that that's really fantastic, and I definitely learned a lot from the students at that time. I asked them, why did that feel like? Do you feel like you did science research, and why? And a lot of the responses were because we were looking at black and white images. That's how they knew
Yeah,
it
like
was
real
science.
pictures.
Yeah. But yeah, there's all these. I guess yeah, science capital is about looking at your perceptions or your attitudes towards science, and being able to kind of widen those or broaden those, or bring in different facets of your life or the things that you know or the people you know, and actually connecting them up together with science as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and one of the really nice things we did was we asked a lot of the young people at the start, what do you think of when you think of a scientist? And we had quite abstract phrases in that part where they were saying they're smart, they do this, they do that. And when we asked them again after a couple of workshops, they would say scientists are people who like Lego. They're my mum, they're nurses, and it was a lot more personal. And that to me showed that those aims we had had in the development had hit home on that aspect.
Yeah. And tell me about kind of the design, I don't want to, send you back several years to like, oh, what was your original kind of goal in designing this workshop in this way? But um, it brings a lot of different things. There's practical elements. Part of the workshop series has this DNA extraction from a strawberry. There's the online citizen science with virus factory. And then it finishes off with this Q&A with
Yeah.
researchers. And I'm fortunate to have been one of the people who's been at the Q&As and asked lots of questions, kind of some about science and some not, by the students. But um, what kind of did you notice in that like arch from kind of start to end in running those workshops?
I think what we were really hoping for was that the students started to see themselves as part of a wider science community and that they saw the link between the basic science that they do at school and research science. Because sometimes those things can feel really disconnected. Like you're sitting in school, you're learning biology, you're looking at pictures of cells. Okay, but how does that relate to modern scientists putting together vaccines? What do they still not know? And being able to see that path for themselves of where they would go academically and where they would go as scientists was something we were really keen. And then being able to tie that to a little bit of history when we got them matching old pictures to old technology to people and seeing that there's always been that link between images, between background science, and between people. And trying to put themselves into that context was what we were going for. And I think the Q&A at the end was always so fun just for how confident they were asking questions in that third workshop compared to the first.
And I guess like that's something that because in the original program you delivered most all of these workshops. So you
Yeah,
got
it's
to
a lot.
witness the you got to witness the path from start to end, and myself and then other colleagues who just got to see the end and hear all of the amazing questions. We didn't really see that journey, but it was definitely really enjoyable to be part of. I remember being asked what I thought Nessie was as well.
Yeah, did you
Uh,
join the ones up north?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm still not sure whether the Loch Ness monster is like a lizard or a dinosaur or like it's still kind of there's all these creative questions that come out that I would never think of. I remember another one where I was asked whether or not electron microscopes were dangerous, and
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, when we use pieces of equipment, we don't necessarily think about the same things as someone
Yeah.
else would. Yeah, but
And I
yeah,
think some of the schools we went to in themselves, that was part of the science capitals. We chose those schools really carefully to make sure we were reaching students who potentially had lower science capital to start with. Potentially they don't know anyone who would say they're a scientist. Potentially they don't have the chance to go and visit science centres or to watch science documentaries. So we visited a few rural schools, both in Wales and in Scotland. We visited some inner city schools in various parts of England. And seeing the different questions that those kids from different backgrounds had was in itself really interesting. So some of the schools we went to were so remote that they weren't used to having visitors. So that one that you joined, in fact.
yeah, yeah.
But it was so interesting the questions that they did have, and hearing that they were confident in realizing that the knowledge they brought was just as valid, even though they didn't live in a city with big science museums and lecture programs. Their experience was still just as valuable.
One of the one of the things that I think about a lot when I talk about the resources and talk about why we targeted that age 9 to 11 top key stage 2, bottom key stage 3, is the way in which people change at a very young age and stop
Yeah.
believing that they can do science. So it's like age 11 by the time lots of children have decided that they like science but they couldn't be a scientist, or that science isn't for them. And that was so much younger than I thought. But it's like core experiences that happen kind of before that then influence your attitudes towards science. I don't know why I'm really preaching about this, but my roundabout way of asking Kat whether you had any formative science experiences when you were younger that really kind of captured your heart, and that's like, how did you get to physics in the first place?
Ooh, so I have quite a mixed one on this. So I wanted to study physics for a long time at school, but one of the secondary schools I went to, and I will not name names, was a school that really didn't have high aspirations for its students. And when I said I wanted to study physics, I was asked, should you, like, maybe psychology? Girls seem to prefer psychology. And to this day, I can only assume they both begin with P. But otherwise, there is nothing in common. Well, you can dig in, they're both sciences, but they're not immediately related to each other. But
No.
then I changed to a school with much higher aspirations, and straight away they were like, yes, absolutely, you should do physics. So I was quite supported through that. But over the years, what I find really interesting is that my mum would say, we are not a sciencey family at all. She considers herself to not be a very sciencey person. And as I've done more science research, I find it so interesting. My mum is the first woman in Scotland who sat higher engineering sciences and higher physics. Like, she went from her girls' school to the local boys' school to sit them. She was so determined, but she doesn't consider herself sciencey.
That's just wow. I can't imagine making that step and achieving
Right?
that. And
Like, and she doesn't think of it. She went into the military as an electrical engineer. That's her background, but she still says, I'm not sciencey.
well, that's, I guess, maybe comes from this separation that some people have between science and engineering, or kind of,
Yeah,
again, it's connecting what the idea of science is to real world applications, right? There is science in engineering, there's science in everything, but connecting those
yeah.
two things together, it doesn't happen sometimes.
Yeah, so in some ways, like, I grew up very sciencey, but was always told it was not sciencey at all. So looking back on that is really interesting. Thinking, what is it about my own family's perceptions of science that make them not see those skills?
I think, yeah, always looking back is like the more you learn about these kinds of things, the more you look back and think, I have an understanding perhaps of how you trod the path that you did.
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about what you think, how you might have moved forwards in bringing citizen science into classrooms in different ways. Is there anything that you think is next? Is there anything that you think there's really scope for in that kind of thing, or are you already doing stuff now that's kind of moved forwards in that way?
I think potentially the side that schools are more likely to be interested in because of our current climate is AI. Because the Department for Education have issued new guidance for how schools use it this year, we're all being told we have to teach our young people to be confident in its use. And that, I think, in my experience from speaking to teachers, a lot of us are feeling a little bit like we're trying to play catch up now, where we're not necessarily experts in something is changing so rapidly, even over the course of each year, that trying to play catch up is very difficult. And being able to put it in this context, to me, is a really powerful context, because what goes on behind the scenes is quite well understood with Zooniverse. So we can confidently use this as an example. And as a positive example, we can talk about limitations in a really clear sense, particularly because we can physically visualize and we can show, okay, Zubot hasn't worked out where the virus is yet because the classifications aren't well enough clumped. if we get better at that, Zoobot will get better at it. So I think it's quite a concrete, clear way to explain how these machine learning programs work, which for me is really powerful to have in schools at the moment. It's a concrete, this works because of this. The more we contribute to it, we impact how it works. And we can teach it incorrectly if we're not careful.
Indeed, we
So I think
can.
that AI side of it, I think, is at the moment a particularly powerful teaching tool. Just as the viruses themselves were coming straight out of COVID, that was what people were really interested in then.
Absolutely. And we do have, as part of the Virus Factory workshops, there is that extension kind of computing based
Yeah.
workshop that touches more on algorithms and kind of there's decision trees involved. I remember that there's cats as
Yep.
what in one of the slides.
Zooniverse cats.
How would you classify the cats? Um, but yeah, I know that there's like increasing conversations even in the wider Zooniverse community about how AI is being used with citizen science. So I know that it's very much on the forefront of everyone's mind in that community as well as, you know, in the wider public, in education. But yeah, I really, it's I've run a couple of workshops as well that have been to do with neural networks, and
Interesting.
yeah, and we're running some in-person activity sessions this year, and one of the things that will probably add to that is going to be the neural networks workshop, and it's really great to be able to talk about how doing the maths is important, but also training the model to do the
Yeah.
right create the right numbers is important. So you can have kind of human error and you can have training error and you can have computational error and all of those things combined to create a program that either works or doesn't. And
And
it's
the
been
importance of people in these programs. Like
yeah
when you do talk to the Zooniverse community and they say that what AI can't pick up is the unknown unknowns, that's what people are for.
yeah and there's the serendipitous discovery. That's a
Yeah.
wonderful phrase that I love about the Zooniverse. We've got one question in the chat, uh, and they've asked, have you ever had any technology failures in the classroom while delivering a lesson, and how did you recover?
um, for these particular workshops, yes. But the way we recovered was having about 17 backups in place. So, first one was our the school computer is going to be able to access the websites. So we always made sure we had that cleared beforehand. We kind of became dab hands at that. And then connections to the technology. So whether that was video calls to our researchers, and I would always carry, at the very least, the school Wi-Fi codes, a separate Wi-Fi hub, and in cases of desperation, my own phone loaded with data ready to hotspot. So some of these solutions are easier as an external provider of activities in the school than in the school itself. But backup, backup, backup was how we got around those, and making as much time before workshops as we could. So I would preload the tabs onto every single device that students would be using before we started the lesson, which again is easier as an external provider. But in a classroom situation, it's something that's worth maybe getting a TA to help with, particularly if you're in a primary school. Have all the devices out before the workshop starts. Get everything loaded and make sure it's working. And then I've always had an offline version of the slides so that if the classification was to go down, we were able to show what they would look like. And I've also got some laminated pictures of the viruses that kids could put stickers on where they detected viruses instead. So all the backups is the answer to that. And also, absolutely, yes, I've had people come into workshops and instead of everyone being on individual tablets, we'll all be up on the smartboard just hitting the cells wherever we can see them because only one screen would work. And
It's amazing how often that happens. I've also run workshops where the campus-wide Wi-Fi stopped working from one building to the next on the devices, and it became like a collaborative effort. Exactly. And one of the
yeah,
things I really enjoy about um, that particular thing going wrong is that because we're talking about citizen science and we're talking about the power of the crowd and the fact that lots of people look at these images and that's why the answer is so good, you can say, well, let's vote in the class. So you can already have the
Yeah,
crowd in the room and then get the majority answer and have a talk about how that consensus can then compare and how that can then like that's an analog version of what's happening behind the scenes anyway.
that's really nice. And yeah, sometimes having those printouts can give you that analog feeling as well, but as you say, are exactly the same experience.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we've probably covered pretty much everything. I don't know if there's anything that you think that we've missed today, Kat.
I know, I think if I was to give one message, it'd just be get stuck in. It's a really fun way to cover some core content, KS2 and KS3. And yeah, there's a little bit of investment in time to working out which lessons you're going to sub out, but it's kind of worth it. It's fun.
Absolutely. And if it happens to be that, viruses and microscopes isn't in the curriculum this year, there's probably 100 different projects active on the Zooniverse at any one time in
Yeah,
so many
absolutely.
different areas that can then help any lesson that you have throughout the year as well. Well, fantastic. Thank you for joining me today, Kat. I've had a great time chatting. I definitely went off on a couple of tangents. I think that's okay. Um, I will be back in a month's time for the next Science Scribbler Q&A and Classify. I'll be joined by someone from one of our other Science Scribbler projects, Sign Up Safari. But thank you, Kat, and thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
Bye.